Make a start with some breaking news that's coming in. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump says one of his first orders of business once he takes office will be to start charging Canada and Mexico a 25% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. Trump posting the threat on his Truth Social account. That's higher than the 10% he had warned on the campaign trail. He says it will be in place until borders are tightened. Let's get your reactions on this story. We have with us economist Moshe Lander. Moshe, good evening and thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Hello.
So this is a major shift in policy and what we have heard so far. Donald Trump now saying it's not about 10 or 20%, but 25% on all goods coming in from Canada. Your reaction to that?
He's not immune from inflation like the rest of us, so his numbers go up just as well as us. Look, 10%, 20%, 25%, it's politicking, right? It's not any sort of economic justification for what he's doing. He wants to try and make the border safe. He thinks that Canada is a source of insecurity, not for immigrants, but for illegal drugs coming into the country. We knew that this was going to be a mess. We saw it 4 to 8 years ago during his first presidency. I don't think there's any secret that he was looking to do maximum damage to his trade partners. And this is just the opening salvo, I guess.
So while he's trying to, of course, tie in two very important issues, one is of trade, economy. The other is, of course, making the borders safe. We've heard a lot from the incoming administration on that. Moshe, we know that making borders safe is something which is a process. It can take a little bit of time. But if this were to go ahead with a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods being sent across to the United States, in your view, how hard is this going to be for the Canadian economy? What sort of a hit are we talking about here?
It's substantial. We're very proud that the U.S. is our biggest trade partner. But if all of a sudden there's an extra 25% that's being added to it, then at what point does that lead to a decrease in the demand for Canadian goods and services? And once that decrease is sustained, does that lead to job losses? Does that lead to a recession that we managed to avoid over the last 4 years, despite all of the problems that we've had on this side of the border of our own doing? And so if there's unemployment, that's the last thing that we need at this point. And it's the last thing that this government needs. They're in a fight for their political life. It looks like they're probably going to lose. This could be the type of thing, though, that if you remember the last time that these two met, it didn't end well. Trump left Quebec City saying very nasty things about the prime minister, calling him names and calling Canadians names in the process, too.
Let me ask you about, if we break it down, because this is not, people had thought, experts had thought maybe oil and gas perhaps could be exempted. But in this case, if this were to be everything like we're discussing and what his post is saying at the moment, what would this mean directly for the consumers here in Canada? Ultimately, what are we going to face? Because it's going to boil down to the consumers eventually.
Yeah, so it's interesting what happens with consumers at that point, because if Americans aren't looking to buy our goods and services, then that's a major source of demand that disappears. So it could actually lead to price reductions in this country, because if the only ones that are looking to buy our stuff is us, then without that inflationary pressure coming from the U.S., there is the possibility that that could be good news for us. The problem, though, is that the Canadian dollar would lose value. And if it loses value, then the stuff that we're buying from the U.S. would actually go up in Canadian dollar prices. Think about buying those iPhones or any other gifts you're thinking of with the holidays coming. All of a sudden, those would be more expensive in Canadian. So it really does balance out. But then it depends on how long this lasts, because at some point, those weak Canadian dollar effects could offset the lack of Canadian demand effects, and it could become inflationary.
Okay. And of course, once again, to reiterate, the president-elect is saying this comes with conditions attached till the borders remain safe. Now, we have to see how this really works out between the Canadian government and the incoming Trump administration. But let me ask you this, because the finance minister, deputy prime minister here, has been asked on several occasions, if this were to be the case with the United States imposing tariffs on several of these products, in this case all, she has maintained that there are things that Canada can do strategically in a targeted way. Can you elaborate a little more? What would that really mean for Canada, and what could those retaliatory efforts look like?
We have a playbook for that. When we were renegotiating NAFTA, he did impose tariffs on us. They were only 10%, like you said. And we can't really push back by just saying, well, we're going to put a blanket 10% tariff or 25% tariff on whatever we buy from the U.S. It's going to rebound back on us badly. But what we can do is we can just basically pull out a map of the U.S. Where are the key leadership positions within the Republican Party? Which states do they represent? Which regions do they represent? Which goods do they manufacture? And let's go hit them with their own retaliatory tariffs. And if we can do a little bit of damage to the Republican leadership, maybe they're a little more inclined to rein him in and say, do you understand what you're doing? And that's exactly what we did back then. We went after Mitch McConnell, we went after Orrin Hatch, and we went after their products and did damage. It's exactly like a little child trying to inflict damage on their big sibling. You can't land a lot of body blows, but if you bite their kneecaps, you might be able to bring them down to size a little bit and create some sort of détente. So we need to go after some kneecaps here, I guess.
Okay, and of course, a lot of reactions expected from the Canadian government as well, officials, depending on what they have to say after they get this information. But for the moment, economist Moshe Lander, always a pleasure. Thank you for breaking it all down.
Anytime.